A black teenager boards a luxury flight for her 16th birthday. Alone, proud, and exactly where she's supposed to be. But when a veteran pilot takes one look at her and assumes she's in the wrong seat, a quiet confrontation becomes a public spectacle. What starts as subtle humiliation soon spirals into something far bigger, as the teen's calm phone call triggers a chain of consequences no one on that flight could have expected. At 30,000 feet, power, perception, and prejudice collide, and by the time they land, nothing will be the same. How far does someone have to go just to prove they belong? Vicky Melville adjusted the strap of her carry-on as she stepped into the cool cabin air, her sneakers quiet against the polished floor of the jet bridge. She didn't pause. Her heart was beating steady. Not fast, not anxious, just full. Today was her birthday, 16. And this flight wasn't just a trip. It was a moment, a rite of passage. She had the window seat in business class on the 9:15 to London, booked under her name, and a stack of books in her bag she couldn't wait to get into. No chaperone, no assistant, no security detail, just her. She walked the length of the cabin slowly but deliberately, eyes taking in the leather seats, the glowing screens, the low ambient hum of air conditioning. She wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. Her father had taught her that. Move like you belong because you do. So she did. She found seat 3A, stowed her backpack in the overhead compartment, and sat with her back straight and her hands resting calmly in her lap. Everything about her posture said composed, but there was the quiet flicker of a smile on her lips. She was proud, and she had every right to be. From her seat, she could see the edge of the galley and the flight attendants moving with quiet purpose. A tall woman with a sharp red bob greeted her with a brief nod. Vicky returned it with a polite hello. No one questioned her. Not yet. Captain Rick Dalton had already decided he didn't like this flight. He wasn't sure why exactly. It was on schedule, the route was clean, and the weather looked favorable across the Atlantic. But there was something. Maybe it was just the weight of routine pressing on him again. These business-class flyers and their pretentious demands, their silent entitlement. The kind who treated the crew like walking coat hangers. He grabbed his cap from the top shelf in the cockpit and walked down the aisle for his pre-flight sweep. A quick pass-through, as always. He liked to see who he was flying. Not for security, really. Just something about seeing the faces made him feel in control. It reminded him this was his aircraft. Then he saw her. Young, black, alone, sitting in the front. He didn't stop walking right away. It was a reflex. He passed her by like she was invisible, like she didn't exist. But something in him tugged. Maybe it was her age. Maybe it was the straight back, the quiet confidence. She didn't look nervous, didn't look apologetic. And that irritated him for reasons he couldn't name. He turned around, walked back, paused at her seat, looming just slightly into her space. "Miss," he said, voice clipped and firm, "economy is behind you." Vicky looked up slowly. Her eyes met his with quiet clarity. "This is my seat, 3A. He didn't respond immediately, just stared. "I have a boarding pass," she added, her voice level, her tone calm but not submissive. She reached into her jacket pocket and unfolded the slip of paper. She held it out. He didn't take it. He barely glanced. "I think there's been a mix-up," he said. "You must be in the wrong place." "No, sir," she replied. "I'm not." There was no fight in her voice, no raised tone, just certainty. The flight attendant with the red bob Jasmine stepped in just then, sensing the tension in the air like it had weight. "Captain Dalton, everything all right here?" Rick didn't answer her. He kept his eyes on Vicky, who still held the boarding pass between her fingers like an anchor. "She says this is her seat," he said. Jasmine nodded, already a step ahead. "Yes, sir, it is. Ms. Melville is in 3A. She gestured gently to the manifest on her tablet. Ticket confirmed. She checked in early. There it was. A fact. Inarguable. But Rick wasn't ready to step away. Not yet. "How old are you?" he asked, voice lowered but still sharp. Vicky blinked. 16. He raised his eyebrows, a silent accusation. 16. Traveling alone, in business class. My father booked it. Right. That word. Just that one word. Vicky didn't flinch, but something in her eyes darkened. She'd been here before. Not on a plane, but in these kinds of conversations, these silences, these half-spoken accusations wrapped in civility. She'd been mistaken for someone's assistant. She'd been checked twice for tickets others passed through with ease. It was a rhythm, a dance she didn't want to perform today. Jasmine cleared her throat gently. "Captain, if there's a concern, I can reconfirm with the gate, but the system's clear." Rick didn't look at her. He looked back at Vicky, and in that moment, something passed between them. Not words, not anger, but the kind of stare that tries to place a person, that scans for cracks, that questions without asking. And when he found none, he stood up straighter. "If you need anything," he said flatly, "ring the call button." Then he walked away. Vicky exhaled slowly. She hadn't realized she was holding her breath. Jasmine crouched gently beside her. "I'm really sorry about that," she said quietly. "It's fine," Vicky said, though it wasn't. "I'm used to it." Jasmine's jaw tensed. "You shouldn't have to be." Vicky didn't answer. She just pulled a small leather journal from her backpack and set it on the tray. The gold-embossed letters on the cover read, Melville & Co. Her father's name, his legacy. And one day, hers. A few rows back, a teenage girl with dirty blonde hair watched the entire exchange with wide eyes. Olivia Monroe had seen Vicky walk in, and at first, she hadn't thought much about her. Just another young passenger. But now Olivia's world was moving, shifting just a little bit on its axis. She hadn't seen what the captain saw, and she wondered why he had. Vicky stared out the window as the plane began to taxi. Her hands rested gently on the journal, fingers still, but inside, her mind was working. A storm was forming. Not loud, not chaotic, but focused. And it had already started with a single, quiet decision. She pulled out her phone. No fanfare, no fuss. One name, one call. It rang once. Then a deep voice answered. "Who, Pumpkin?" Captain Rick Dalton stood at the cockpit door, arms crossed, jaw tight. He was staring straight ahead, but his mind was still on seat 3A. The girl, Vicky. 16, she said, calm as you please, like she knew something he didn't. He didn't like that. He didn't like not knowing things, especially when they involved his aircraft, his rules, his authority. He'd flown for over 20 years. Military, commercial, even a brief stint in private aviation, when he thought he wanted to play chauffeur for billionaires. In all that time, he'd learned to read people. He thought he could smell trouble before it started. And something about that girl, it just didn't sit right with him. Not because she was young, not because she was alone. He told himself it was the situation, not the skin. He'd never say it out loud, but deep down, some part of him didn't think she belonged in that seat. At least, not without proving it. Jasmine Pierce wasn't new to this. She had seen dozens of tense moments unfold in tight aisles and narrow galleys, but this one stuck. Something about the look on Vicky's face, that quiet stillness, the way she folded back into her seat without drama. It got under Jasmine's skin. She kept glancing toward the front row as she prepped the cabin for takeoff. Vicky hadn't said another word. She was just sitting there, hands in her lap, eyes out the window, as if waiting for something. From the corner of her eye, Jasmine noticed a few passengers whispering across the aisle. One woman leaned toward her husband, murmuring under her breath. He glanced toward Vicky, then looked away quickly. The tension was spreading, rippling silently through the row like a cold draft. Further back, Olivia Munro hadn't stopped thinking about what she'd seen. She was still buckled in beside her father, who was immersed in an e-book about mid-market investing and hadn't noticed a thing. Olivia wanted to ask him something, wanted to point it out, but stopped herself. She knew how those conversations went. Her dad would say it was a misunderstanding, that people were too quick to call things what they weren't, that it wasn't personal. But to Olivia, it felt very personal. She had seen the captain's face. Not a flicker of uncertainty, not a question, just immediate dismissal. Back up front, Vicky held the phone low beneath the tray table, screen dimmed, her voice barely above a whisper. She knew her father was already moving. She didn't need to explain much. The moment he heard her say, "Captain," question my seat without scanning my ticket, she heard the pause, that long breath on the other end. Then, "I've got it." She hung up, slipped the phone back into her hoodie pocket, then closed her eyes. The hum of the engine swelled as the plane taxied out onto the runway. Lights along the tarmac blinked past the windows like sleepy fireflies. The cabin dimmed. A quiet hush fell over the passengers as Jasmine gave the final safety demo. The captain's voice came over the speaker, cool and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're number 3 for takeoff. Should be wheels up in approximately 8 minutes. Weather over the Atlantic is looking smooth. Sit back, relax, and we'll be in the air shortly." He sounded calm now, polished, that voice they teach you in flight school. But under the surface, Rick Dalton was simmering. Something about this didn't feel finished. Something about that girl's eyes, steady and unimpressed, made him uneasy. As the plane gained speed and lifted off, Vicky pressed her head against the window. London's city lights sparkled below, a blanket of gold against a velvet black sky. Somewhere beneath those lights, her father was already dialing numbers, waking people up, shifting systems she didn't fully understand. He wouldn't yell, he wouldn't threaten, he would just correct. She wasn't scared, but she was tired. It had been like this since she was little. At first, people assumed she was lost. Then, they assumed she was lying. Now, at 16, they assumed she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. Someone who could sit in a leather seat near the front of the plane. Someone who didn't need to explain herself. Her journal still sat on the tray, unopened. She didn't feel like writing now. 30 minutes into the flight, Jasmine approached with a tray of water and warm towels. She paused beside Vicky, knelt down discreetly. "Would you like anything? Something to drink? We have juices, tea, some soda if—" "I'm fine," Vicky said. Then after a second, "Thanks." Jasmine hesitated. "If you need anything at all, please, don't hesitate. I'm really sorry about earlier." Vicky nodded. It wasn't her fault, but she appreciated the effort. As Jasmine walked away, she passed Rick in the galley. He was pouring himself a cup of black coffee, hand steady but his eyes distant. "She's calm," Jasmine said, folding her hands behind her back. Rick glanced at her. "You think I overstepped?" "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Jasmine waited, then added, "You didn't check her pass, just said she was in the wrong seat." Rick bristled. "I've been flying longer than you've been out of high school. I've seen people sneak into business class more times than I can count." She wasn't sneaking. She boarded first, with a priority ticket. Rick took a sip of his coffee and looked down the aisle. "Then she's just lucky." Jasmine wanted to say more, but she didn't. She turned and walked back toward the cabin, cheeks flushed, stomach tight. In seat 3B, the older man beside Vicky hadn't said a word the whole flight, Not during the exchange, not during takeoff. But now, as the meal carts rolled out, he leaned slightly toward her and said, "You handled that well. Most people would have lost it." Vicky turned to him. He had kind eyes, a navy blazer, and a wedding band on his left hand. "Thanks," she said. "I'm Eric, and for what it's worth, he was wrong." Vicky gave him a small, grateful smile. "Vicky, pleasure." As they talked quietly, a notification flashed silently on Rick Dalton's flight tablet. Something about a systems check initiated remotely. He frowned, tapped through a few screens. Nothing serious. Just a request from Central Command for an unscheduled diagnostic. Strange timing, but not unheard of. Still, it bothered him. In a glass office thousands of miles away, Miles Thompson put down the phone and picked up another. His tone was even. His instructions were clear. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. But the wheels were turning. The airline's regional director had already been looped in. A media advisor had been alerted, and the internal review process had quietly begun, long before the plane would touch the tarmac in London. And Vicky? Vicky just sipped her apple juice and pulled a book from her backpack. It was second nature now. Carry yourself with dignity, let the rest sort itself out. She flipped to the first page. But her eyes didn't follow the words. She was thinking about the moment when people decide who you are without asking, when they see your skin and subtract your seat, when they hear your age and erase your name. She was done being erased. The cabin lights had dimmed to a soft gold, casting long shadows over the rows of business-class passengers. The clink of cutlery and the quiet shuffle of feet had faded into the hush of overnight travel. Somewhere overhead, the plane sliced through the high Atlantic air at cruising altitude, steady and silent. Vicky Melville wasn't asleep. She stared at the back of the seat in front of her, arms crossed, earbuds in but no music playing. Her body was still, but her mind was wide awake, restless. She had played the conversation over and over again in her head. The way the captain had looked at her, the way he hadn't even reached for her boarding pass, the way he dismissed her with just his voice. She hated how familiar that felt. She leaned her head to the side, looking out the window. The stars were barely visible against the inky sky. Somewhere beneath all that darkness was ocean. Somewhere beyond that ocean was London. But what mattered most was what had already taken off on the ground. Her father's phone call. Miles Thompson didn't do rage. He didn't send angry emails or call for heads to roll. That wasn't his style. His power came in silence, in the way people answered his calls on the first ring, cleared schedules for him, changed policies without protest. He didn't throw punches. He repositioned chess pieces. And by now she knew he was already moving. In a private executive terminal tucked behind the main airport, the night shift staff at Meltec Aviation headquarters was quietly activated. Miles had reached his chief operations officer less than 10 minutes after the call with Vicky. No raised voice, no emotion, just, "I need you to look into Flight 8423, business class, row 3. His COO knew what that meant. Within minutes, a tech support team had initiated remote diagnostics on the aircraft. Not to interrupt the flight, Miles wouldn't put Vicky in danger, but to flag the system, to make sure when the plane landed, there would be no confusion about who was watching. Then came the secondary call, not to the airline's general number, but to a direct contact at the carrier's boardroom level, a favor returned from 5 years ago. Miles didn't speak long, but by the time he hung up, the name Rick Dalton had been circled in a digital personnel log. The circle wasn't red, not yet, but it was glowing. In the cabin, Vicky finally pulled her blanket to her lap and reached again for her phone. She wasn't checking messages, she was rereading one. It was a text from Dana Caldwell, her godmother and the family's longtime attorney. Already on it, paper trail is clean. Let me know when you land. Vicky tapped her screen off. Dana didn't waste words. She knew what this was and what it wasn't. No lawsuit, no scandal, not unless it had to be. But visibility, that was coming. Olivia Munro wasn't asleep either. She had her seat reclined halfway. A movie paused on her screen, but her eyes weren't on it. They kept drifting to the front of the plane, toward Vicky. She couldn't stop thinking about how calm she'd stayed, how she hadn't yelled or made a scene. Olivia thought about what she would have done in that same position. Probably cried. Or gotten up and moved just to avoid embarrassment. But Vicky hadn't moved. She didn't shift. Didn't flinch. She sat in her seat like she had planted herself there, like she had roots, and that unsettled Olivia. Not because she didn't admire it, but because it forced her to admit she'd never had to be that still, that composed, just to be seen as allowed. She nudged her father gently. "Dad?" He stirred, half asleep. "Yeah?" The girl in the front row. "Did you see what happened?" "No, honey. What girl?" "Black girl, seat 3A. The pilot told her she didn't belong there. Didn't even check her ticket." Her father rubbed his face. "I'm sure it was just confusion." She showed him her ticket. He didn't look at it. Then the flight attendant said it was her seat. Still didn't apologize. "Well," he said, adjusting his seat again, "I'm sure it'll be fine. Try to get some rest." Olivia sat back, unsatisfied, the way adults shrugged things off. "I'm sure it'll be fine." It was like putting duct tape over a cracked window. The break was still there. You just didn't have to look at it for a while. Meanwhile, Rick Dalton hadn't slept in flight in years, but tonight, he didn't even close his eyes. He was reviewing flight metrics in the cockpit, tabs open to routine diagnostics. Everything looked normal. Except he had received a ping, a quiet one, just a system message marked, "Maintenance request flagged, remote diagnostic active." He didn't know what it meant. It didn't affect the flight, but it wasn't normal. And the timing, right after takeoff. He stepped out of the cockpit and walked back through the galley. Jasmine stood near the curtain, scribbling notes on a service log. She looked up as he approached. "Everything all right, Captain?" "Yeah, fine. Just checking in." She waited for him to say more. He didn't. He just lingered for a moment, then moved on, walking halfway down the business class aisle, pausing near row 3. Vicky didn't look up. She felt him there, but she didn't move. He said nothing, stood still for a few seconds too long, then turned and walked away. She had taken his silence from earlier and built a wall out of it, and now he couldn't find the door. Somewhere over the ocean, the first threads of sunrise began bleeding across the sky. Not a full light, just the faintest blue smudge against the black. The aircraft would land in 4 hours. But the landing wasn't the finish line. It was the beginning. Miles Thompson was preparing for a media meeting, not because he wanted press, but because he knew how this worked. The story would leak either way. Better it came from a place of strength than one of apology. He wasn't interested in calling names or waging war. He wanted one thing: protocol. Why did a captain bypass scanning a ticket? Why did he assume a black teenager didn't belong in business class? Why wasn't the flight crew empowered to override that in real time? It wasn't about Vicky alone. It was about the thousands of other moments that went unreported. The ones that didn't involve a billionaire's daughter. The ones where a girl got moved, or got off the plane, or got quiet. This one was going to be loud. And Vicky? She watched the sky start to change outside her window, that smear of pre-dawn color stretching further, blooming. Her eyes stayed on it, her breath steady, not angry, not vindicated. Just present. She didn't need to do anything else. The flight would land, and the world below would be waiting. The seatbelt sign dinged off with a familiar tone, and a wave of movement rippled through the cabin. Passengers stretching, flight attendants wheeling carts, the low shuffle of feet toward lavatories. It was just after 2:00 a.m. London time. The aircraft sliced quietly through the upper air corridors, thousands of feet above the Atlantic, engines steady, speed unbroken. Everything looked calm, but tension, like a second cabin pressure, had settled invisibly across the plane. Vicky sat upright, not because she couldn't sleep, but because she had stopped trying. There was a quiet readiness in her posture, a stillness with purpose. She sipped water from the glass Jasmine had brought her earlier, fingertips resting lightly on the rim. Outside the window, clouds floated in soft piles below the wings, lit pale by the moon. She blinked slowly, unbothered by the passing of hours. Her world had shifted already. The sky was just scenery now. Rick Dalton sat back in the cockpit, staring at the message that had just popped up on his secondary screen. A new one. Not urgent, not a system failure, but strange. Priority routing notification. Flight 8423 is being flagged for special operations clearance upon landing. Await ground instruction before proceeding to gate. That wasn't standard, not unless there was a diplomatic escort, a security concern, or a VVP protocol in play. Rick didn't like the word flagged. It didn't sound like an honor. It sounded like trouble. He radioed the co-pilot, who was returning from the rear cabin, and gestured toward the screen. "Did we get a heads up about this?" The co-pilot squinted, rubbed his brow. "Nope. That's new. Maybe customs?" Rick didn't reply right away. He tapped the message off the screen and leaned back. His gut told him what this was about. Not a person. Not security. A response. Someone had pulled a string, and he had a feeling he knew who held the other end. In the cabin, Jasmine moved with deliberate calm, checking trays, refilling coffee, collecting empty glasses with practiced efficiency. But her mind kept tugging her back to row 3. She stole another glance. Vicky hadn't moved much. There was something about her that made Jasmine uneasy, not in a threatening way, just too quiet, too measured. Jasmine had seen all kinds of travelers. Tired parents, angry executives, newlyweds too drunk on champagne to notice turbulence. But Vicky? She carried silence like a weapon. Not sharp, not violent, but heavy, controlled. Jasmine couldn't imagine being 16 and sitting there, frozen in that kind of scrutiny, still holding your ground. Olivia Munro noticed it too. She'd been watching, not in a nosy way, but with that twitchy attention only teenagers have, the sense that something important was happening, and no one else seemed to be paying enough attention. Her father had fallen asleep again, headphones askew, mouth slightly open. But Olivia couldn't stop watching Vicky. There was a shift in her. Olivia couldn't name it exactly. Earlier, Vicky had looked distant, tight, with quiet fury maybe, but now she looked settled, like she had figured out what was coming and didn't mind. That kind of calm terrified Olivia more than shouting ever could. She unbuckled her belt, stood up, and walked forward on shaky legs, clutching her empty cup like a pass. Jasmine turned as she reached the galley. "Need a refill, sweetheart?" Jasmine asked. Olivia hesitated. Then, without looking back, she said, "Can I talk to her?" Jasmine blinked. "To who?" She nodded toward row 3. Jasmine didn't respond right away. Then she gave the smallest of nods. "Go ahead, she's awake." Olivia stepped down the aisle with cautious steps, pausing beside the seat. Vicky turned slightly, surprised but not defensive. "Hey," Olivia said, clutching her cup. "I'm not trying to bother you. I saw what happened earlier, and it was messed up." Vicky raised an eyebrow slightly. "Not rude, just curious." I'm Olivia, she added quickly. Back in 6C. Vicky gave her a small nod. Vicky? I just wanted to say, Olivia said, lowering her voice. You didn't deserve that, and you handled it better than anyone I know would have. Vicky looked at her for a moment, reading her, then said, Thanks. Olivia hesitated. Is someone doing something about it? I mean, are you okay? Vicky allowed the faintest smile to pull at the corner of her mouth. Someone's doing something, yeah. Olivia smiled back, awkward but sincere. Good. That's good. Okay. I'll leave you alone. She turned to go, but Vicky stopped her with a soft, hey. Olivia turned back. You were the only one who said anything, Vicky said. That matters. It was small, but it stayed with Olivia all the way back to her seat. 40 minutes before landing, the captain's voice returned over the speaker. This time it was less polished. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been informed of a minor scheduling change upon arrival at Heathrow. We'll be taxiing to a remote gate instead of a direct terminal. We ask for your patience as we complete post-flight procedures. You'll be disembarking by shuttle. Thank you for your cooperation. The message sounded routine, but it wasn't. The man in seat 3B, Eric, leaned slightly toward Vicky. That normal? Vicky shrugged. For someone else, maybe. Below them, Heathrow's tarmac glowed under early dawn light, a gentle haze settling over the concrete. But parked near the remote gate were 2 black vehicles, idling with lights flashing amber, and 3 staff members in Navy uniforms waiting beside them. One held a clipboard. Another checked a phone every 10 seconds. The third, Dana Caldwell. Hair tied back, expression cool, legal folder under her arm like a bag. Miles Thompson was already waiting on the other end of a live call line, patched through to the airline's director of operations, who was now frantically checking his email thread for whatever he might have missed. Why is this flight being intercepted? The director asked. Miles didn't raise his voice. It's not being intercepted. It's being greeted. Greeted? Because when someone challenges protocol at 35,000 feet, I want to see what's done about it before my daughter steps off that plane. Your daughter? There was silence on the other end. I see, the director said finally. I don't want press, Miles said. But I do want accountability, and I want it before that door opens. Back on the aircraft, the cabin buzzed as passengers gathered their things, rubbing their eyes, adjusting jackets, stretching limbs. The flight had been quiet, uneventful, even pleasant for most. But for Vicky Melville, this had been a reckoning. She didn't need the announcement. She didn't need an apology over the speaker. She just needed to stand and step out. And when that door opened, she would. The cabin door opened with a smooth hiss, the humid London morning spilling in through the gap before anyone moved. The jet bridge wasn't connected. No crowd of passengers streamed off into a terminal. Instead, a set of portable stairs extended to the tarmac below, and the waiting shuttle buses sat silently just past the engine's slow-ticking cooldown. It was a strange arrival. Quiet, precise, and clearly arranged with intention. Most of the passengers didn't notice, or if they did, they didn't care. They were too busy adjusting watches, pulling down bags, yawning off a transatlantic daze. But Vicky Melville noticed everything. She rose slowly, unbuckling her seatbelt with a soft click. The moment didn't feel big. It didn't need to. The statement wasn't in her words, it was in her presence. The way she rolled her shoulders back and stepped into the narrow aisle, calm, focused, untouchable. Captain Rick Dalton stood outside the cockpit door with a clipboard in hand, pretending to review post-flight notes. He had expected the usual, greetings, a few polite nods from passengers, and then quiet retreat. But now, he was unsure whether to meet Vicky's gaze or avoid it entirely. She gave him nothing, not a look, not a flinch. She walked past him like he was a wall, not a man. Behind her, Eric stood to retrieve his bag, then paused and nodded toward Rick. Firm, silent, unmistakably disapproving. It wasn't rude. It wasn't theatrical. But it landed. Rick's jaw tightened. At the bottom of the stairs, Dana Caldwell stepped forward with authority in every footfall. Her heels clicked sharply on the concrete, black folder tucked against her hip. She looked like someone who had cleared 5 meetings before breakfast and won every one. As Vicky stepped onto the tarmac, the breeze catching the ends of her braids, Dana moved to meet her. No hug, no fanfare, just a hand gently placed on Vicky's shoulder. "You okay?" Dana asked, voice low. Vicky nodded. "Yeah." "Good. Let's walk." Behind them, a uniformed airline representative approached in a stiff, overly rehearsed hurry. "Miss Melville?" she asked, glancing at Dana like she didn't know who to address. "I'm Dana Caldwell," Dana said, extending a card before the woman could ask. "Family counsel. And this is Vicky, yes." The woman hesitated, unsure how to proceed. "We've arranged private transportation to the terminal. There's a small reception team inside. Management would like to offer an apology and speak." Dana hummed. "Let's get out of this wind first, then we'll talk." They climbed into the black SUV waiting just past the security fence. As soon as the doors shut, the atmosphere changed. The privacy felt like armor. Vicky sat with her eyes fixed ahead, shoulders loose now, the pressure of altitude and silence finally leaving her body. Dana glanced over. "You didn't record it?" "No. Doesn't matter," Dana said, opening the folder. Gate security cameras caught the whole interaction, including the part where he didn't so much as glance at your ticket. Vicky didn't smile, but her eyes flickered with something that looked like relief. "You know your dad," Dana said, flipping through her pages. "He doesn't call favors often, but when he does—" "I know," Vicky said softly. "He moves fast." "Moves quietly," Dana corrected. "That's why it scares people more." The SUV turned past the edge of the airport, winding toward a private wing of the terminal not typically used by commercial flights. Dana's phone buzzed once. She glanced at it, tapped a reply, and slid it away. "Or just sent their formal reply," she said. "Internal review opened. Pilot removed from all current international flight rotations pending inquiry." Vicky looked out the window, processing. "He won't get fired." "Maybe not," Dana said, "but the record won't vanish. And more importantly, he'll never forget that you didn't let it slide." There was silence between them. Then Vicky whispered, "I didn't want to make a scene." "You did it," Dana replied. "They did. You just didn't shrink to make them comfortable again." The SUV rolled to a slow stop at the private entrance. A set of glass doors opened, and 2 more airline representatives stood waiting. One middle-aged, suit crisp, tie tight, eyes tired. Vicky inhaled through her nose, then exhaled slowly. She opened the door herself. Inside, the lighting was soft and corporate, the air cool, the furniture arranged like someone wanted it to feel casual. It didn't. "Ms. Melville," the man said, stepping forward. "My name is Philip Devers, Executive Flight Director for Transatlantic Air. I want to extend a personal apology for what you experienced on board." Vicky didn't shake his hand. She nodded once. "We take incidents like this very seriously." Dana cut in with a calm, surgical voice. "Mr. Devers, this isn't a lawsuit. But let's not pretend it's a miscommunication. It was profiling, and your captain made assumptions without fact-checking. The camera shows everything. She was dismissed without verification." Devers looked slightly flushed, but nodded. "Yes, that's why we've already taken steps. We've opened an investigation. Captain Dalton has been placed on leave, and retraining protocols are being reviewed. We're also reviewing how our crew should be empowered to override in real time." "And the apology?" Dana asked. Devers turned to Vicky, folding his hands. "Miss Melville, we are sincerely sorry. You should never have been questioned. You had every right to that seat, and the fact that it was challenged without cause is deeply unacceptable." Vicky nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that." A moment of silence followed. Devers added, "We'd like to offer a formal statement, including your perspective, if you're open to it." Anna raised an eyebrow. "She'll think about it. For now, we'd like to be escorted to our driver." The man nodded, stepping aside. He knew not to push. Back in the car, Vicky slumped slightly against the seat, the tension finally leaking from her bones. "You know," Dana said, smiling faintly, "most girls would have cried, or yelled, or backed down." Vicky looked over. "I wanted to yell, but you didn't." Vicky stared ahead, voice steady. "Because he wanted me to." Dana let that sit for a moment. "Your father's waiting at the hotel," she added. "Room's ready. You've got the whole suite to yourself if you want quiet." "I want art," Vicky said. Dana turned, surprised. "I was coming to London for the galleries," Vicky said. "That's still my plan." Dana smiled. "That's the most Melville thing I've ever heard." Vicky leaned her head against the window, watching Heathrow disappear behind them. She didn't need cameras. She didn't need headlines. She just needed to reclaim her space, and she had. And now, finally, she could breathe. The London air was crisp and clean that afternoon, brushing softly through the courtyard of the Langford Modern Art Museum. Vicky Melville stood in front of a large glass window, looking out at the sculpture garden below, her breath fogging the pane just slightly. She pressed her palms into her coat pockets, her shoulder bag hanging loosely at her side. Behind her, quiet footsteps echoed across the smooth gallery floors. No one approached her. No one bothered her. And for the first time in days, she didn't feel watched. She just felt present. She had walked the museum alone for 2 hours, moving from exhibit to exhibit like the silence was a friend. Oil portraits, abstracts, color explosions framed in white. She had paused longest in the African diaspora wing. Modern expressions, bold textures, colors so loud they vibrated. Each painting looked like someone had refused to be erased. She understood that. Outside, a sleek black car waited discreetly by the curb. The driver hadn't said much on the way over, just smiled at her through the mirror and held the door open like she was royalty. No questions, no small talk. That's how her father arranged things, not for show, but for space, for peace. Now, with the museum nearly empty and the afternoon sun slanting low across the glass, Vicky pulled out her journal and sat on a bench tucked between 2 minimalist sculptures. She opened to a clean page and scribbled quietly. "Said I didn't belong, but I never moved." She let the pen rest. Somewhere across town, the airline's boardroom buzzed with post-meeting energy. A memo had been sent out to every pilot, every senior flight attendant, every corporate executive. It was drafted in legal language, but soaked in message. Assumptions made in the absence of fact are not protocol. They are liability. Captain Rick Dalton had already been removed from the international rotation. He was given a choice: attend a mandated, high-level equity retraining program with an external oversight board, or step down. He hadn't responded, yet. But internally, his file was no longer labeled senior priority. It now read, pending evaluation. That alone told the story. The media hadn't picked up the full event, not yet. But whispers had started. A young black passenger. A questionable challenge to her seat. Quiet internal changes. A well-connected father who hadn't spoken to press, but whose silence loomed louder than a headline. And Miles Thompson? He was already 2 steps ahead. From his private office at Meltech, he drafted a short personal letter. Direct, not emotional. No need to attach Vicky's name or the flight number. He simply addressed it to the airline's CEO. When the people who design your aircrafts are raising daughters, we expect your captains to greet them with respect, not suspicion. He signed it and sent it without fanfare. Then he picked up his phone and called the one person he truly wanted to speak to. Vicky answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said, voice soft. "Pumpkin," he replied, his tone melting. "How was the museum?" "Peaceful." "That's good." She paused. "Thanks." "For what you did. For everything." "I didn't do anything," he said. "You did. I just cleared the path." "You didn't yell at anyone?" He chuckled. "Not once. Didn't have to." Vicky smiled to herself, watching a couple walk hand in hand past the tall museum doors. "I didn't cry." "I know. I wanted to, but I didn't." "Because you're stronger than you think." "I'm 16, she said. "You're 16, he repeated, "and already teaching people how to fly right." They sat on the line in silence, not needing to fill the space. Then Vicky said, "I want to come home, but not today." "You take your time. I think I'll visit the Tate tomorrow." "Good choice. Get the big headphones for the audio tour. The cheap ones make everything sound like a voicemail." She laughed. Really laughed. For the first time since that flight. That sound, clear and bright, made Miles exhale slowly on the other end of the line. His daughter had her peace back. That was enough. That evening, Vicky wandered into a small cafe tucked behind the museum, ordered hot cocoa, and took a window seat. She pulled out her journal again and wrote. "Today, no one asked who I was, no one made me explain why I was sitting where I was sitting, and still I carried the weight of yesterday. But it didn't drag me down. It taught me where I refused to shrink." Outside, the sky dimmed into gold and ash. The city moved around her. Buses grumbling down the streetlights blinking on, jackets pulled tighter against the coming wind. A notification buzzed gently on her phone. A text from Dana. "SYI, the pilot won't be flying internationally again for a while. You good?" Vicky typed back. "I was always good." Then she tucked the phone away and turned to the window, watching the light fade. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need a spotlight. She needed what every 16-year-old deserved. Freedom to move through the world without being stopped for simply existing. And today she had that, not because someone gave it to her, but because she claimed it, quietly, fully, without apology. The world hadn't changed overnight, but she had, and that was enough, for now.